Hello, friends. Welcome to Leo, although we're nearly at the end of Leo. But we've had a new moon in Leo last Thursday, Thursday the 15th, early in the morning, but it was also an eclipse. So although it's a little bit late, the eclipse energy is likely to last for up to 6 months. So I want to talk about that as well as a few other bits and pieces. Yeah, as usual, in my broadcast, there's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Not always relevant, but whatever. Choose whatever works for you and leave the rest. We had Lion's Gate on the 8th of August, just over a week ago, and that has some special significance, and I'll talk about that. The nodal axis has also changed from Pisces Virgo into Aquarius Leo. Pluto is currently trine Uranus and will be for some time because they're both slow-moving planets. And this transit repeats 4 times before Uranus actually moves on. I want to just make a mention of cervical cancer and mainstream medicine. Also about Dr. Billy Bay being able to practice medicine again after being banned, deregistered. Oh, goodness. I've also come across something called the Les Mills method of yoga teaching, and I want to talk to you about that a little bit. So let's start with a new moon in Leo, which occurred last week. Uh, just Leo energy embraces love and romance, creativity and generosity. It's also a great time to have celebrations, parties, to play and have some fun. Leo energy is dignified. It is also determined. Perhaps a negative aspect of Leo may be a tendency towards arrogance. And this is an opportunity for us to be aware of our attitudes towards others. So be kind. The solar eclipse that accompanies this new moon is quite significant as part of a bigger scheme of astrological energies. Now, the eclipse wasn't experienced in Australia, in this part of the world. It started in the Arctic Ocean and passed over Greenland, Iceland, part of the Atlantic Ocean, Portugal, and Spain. It was a total solar eclipse. That is, the moon is between the sun and the earth. And just because we can't see it doesn't mean to say that we don't experience the energies and have them affect us, no matter where you are in the world. Eclipses are always associated with the nodes of the moon. In this case, the eclipse is associated with the south node in Leo. And according to Bernadette Brady, the meaning of this eclipse concerns the breaking out of negative situations where perhaps no hope can be seen, to more positive spaces containing many options. You may have been worried about things, and that will suddenly clear. So the future actually looks quite positive. Just a reminder that eclipses occur in families, and every so often the energy of the eclipse will recur at a different latitude. So let's talk about Lion's Gate for a moment. Many of you are aware that we have experienced this Lion's Gate, the 8th day of the 8th month of August every year. However, this year seems to be a little bit more significant because when you add 8th month and the eighth day of the 8th month together with 2026, it becomes the number 8 as well. And so this is rare numerical harmony. At this time, the sun and the bright fixed star Sirius are also conjunct. And for the ancient Egyptians, this signaled the time that the Nile would flood and bring abundance for their harvests. So the combinations of so many symbols this year suggests there's a very powerful time for manifestation of abundance in all its forms. It's not too late to plant a seed for your abundance to multiply and grow. Remember, abundance doesn't always mean money. According to Penny Shelton, this number 8 is also expressed in the tarot, and the 8th card of the major arcana is strength. The picture is of a woman standing beside a lion and with one hand gently resting on him. This visual is meant to represent a relationship built on trust and courage, compassion and love, all very good Leo qualities. Yet another aspect of the planetary energy at the moment is the moon's nodal axis has moved from Pisces, Virgo into Aquarius, Leo. Now, the nodal axis moves approximately every 18 months or so and has an approximate 19-year orbit. So from a collective perspective, the North Node in Aquarius is asking us to look towards a future that is more beneficial for the people. It's about leaving behind rulers and directions it's about leaving behind rulers and directions coming from people in positions of power and authority, kings and people who think they would be kings. So in the next 6 months, you may well notice a number of these people in positions of power and influence exiting their positions of power. And it is part of a bigger scheme of things that Pluto is assisting in. And I've mentioned this before in my newsletters. Now, Pluto and Uranus are currently in a 120-degree relationship, which is a very harmonious relationship. This is quite important. The more learned astrologers claim that it's from the seed point which occurred in the 1960s when Pluto and Uranus were conjunct. And the trine is picking up that energy that manifested in the 60s and now raising it to yet another level. Some of the rebellion and new ideas that arose at that time, and some of you might remember that, some of you might not, they're now being refined and progressed to another level. Both Pluto and Uranus are slow-moving planets, and the dance they're currently engaged in mean that they will cross 5 times. So it'll be a bit like this, 5 times in the next 16, 18 months. And so much of that new revolutionary activity and ideas that occurred in the 60s is now being promoted and encouraged. My question to you is, what part are you going to play in the manifestation of new ideas and new ways of living? We can't keep going the way we've been going. We have to leave behind the old. Jupiter has also recently moved into Leo and will be there for another year or so. Jupiter expands everything it touches. So check the connections between Jupiter and any planet that you might have in Leo, or a fire sign, because there will be a benefit for you as well. Now, before I leave the astrology and move on to some other matters, it's important to remember that both Mars and Pluto are currently what we call out of bounds. And this simply means that their path that they're following is outside the normal range of paths around the ecliptic. And this also means then that the energy that they manifest can be extreme, and it's not modified by connection with any other planets. Actually, I'm very encouraged by this because I would like to see changes in the way our world is managed. I don't believe our leaders in any area have been doing us justice. It's been too much about self-aggrandizement, I think. What do you think? And just to remind you that the energy of the eclipse, of which I spoke a few minutes ago, find out where it is in your chart, because this eclipse energy doesn't necessarily manifest straight away. It can have influence for several months going forward. Observe. So something not necessarily astrological, but justice and medical practice. I recently reposted a story on Facebook by a lady called Annie Jean Mulcahy about Dr. William Bay, who was suspended from medical practice in August 2022. And the report says, I quote, "A doctor who labelled COVID vaccines the crime of the century
has forced medical authorities to hand back his license after a 2-year suspension. I think it's more like it's 4-year suspension. Never mind. Queensland Supreme Court has sided with Dr. William Bay, who self-represented against a top legal team employed by the Queensland Medical Board and the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency, AHPRA. Now, many of us have not been particularly excited or impressed by the way AHPRA has behaved during COVID. Anyhow, Dr. Bay was only one of many, many medical practitioners who were forced to retire or resign from medical practice because what they were doing didn't meet what the medical board and AHPRA were saying they had to do. And they were mandating activities and behaviours that did not align with the personal ethics and values of the doctors. So what do you do when, the boss tells you to do something and you know in your heart it's the wrong thing to do? These doctors were stood down because they did what they felt was right in their heart. It's very interesting, I find, that these directives have now been found to be illegal. I do hope that as a result of this verdict for William Bay, that many other health practitioners will return to professional practice. While I don't always agree with the solutions offered by conventional medicine, because they're mostly pharmaceutically based, doesn't mean that they don't play a very valuable part in our community. And when we are not well, we need to consider all our medical options, including our medical practitioners. Leo's good for a party. I encourage you to build communities, have a party. A young woman I met years ago when I first came to the coast recently wrote about a soup party that they had in their community. Apparently, everybody contributed a different sort of soup. We all come from different backgrounds, Mexican, Brazilian, Hungarian, whatever. And there's a variety of breads to go with that. And apparently it was a really interesting and fun experience. I share this since it might be a suggestion for something you could do in your street or your community, maybe the kids' football group or the sewing circle you have, or something that you're associated with. Social activities help build relationships and communities. And strong nations are built on strong communities. So I encourage you to get involved or build a community wherever you are. Now, female health. I've written about it in previous newsletters because my trust of mainstream medicine, as you know, has been tested by the events of the last 4 or 5 years. And in the last newsletter, I mentioned mammograms and how useful they're not. I came across a piece today that talks about pap smears and how they now are changing, apparently. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that as women, you neglect your female health. But I do encourage you to check out exactly what tests you're agreeing to receive and what they really mean, what they're really showing. Are they giving you useful information? Or are they just tests for the sake of having tests? Have the parameters around the tests changed to fit a pattern that hasn't been met or needs to be met in a different way? I do encourage you to question everything. Now, what about yoga? I'm a yoga teacher. And I recently had a conversation with another yoga teacher who's had experience what she calls the Les Mills method of teaching yoga. I was appalled. You are aware that I encourage you to move your bodies in any way that you choose that's enjoyable and beneficial for you. But not all practices and not all yoga practices are the same, and that's okay. The yoga that I teach and have practiced for most of my life engages the body, the mind, and my soul, if you believe you have one. It served me very well, and I struggle to understand how people can benefit spiritually and emotionally from any practice that has been commodified and commercialized in such a way that it no longer represents what I understand to be yoga.
The Sanskrit root from which the word yoga derives means that the yoking together of the body and the mind and the spirit. And when you are engaged in a very structured set of exercises that focus on the physical body and doesn't address the spiritual aspects of life, to me, this isn't yoga. But, you don't have to agree with me. And I do encourage you to do whatever yoga works for you. Move your body in whatever way works for you. It might be walking, swimming, hiking, riding a bicycle, kayaking. It doesn't matter what it is. It's just important for us to keep our bodies moving because it keeps our circulation going, therefore our brains working, and it does help in keeping us healthy and well longer. Now, the swans, I have written about the swans, I think, a couple of months ago, because I get very excited when we have eggs and cygnets that hatch just outside my front door. And the 6 cygnets, we had 6 eggs and 6 cygnets. It was so exciting. They all hatched. They're now 4 weeks old and looking very strong and healthy. I've just fed them peas and corn and oats, and they love that. They seem to love the oats more than the peas and corn. The adults are very protective of the cygnets and they stretch out their long necks to keep the other birds away, and they go to try and keep me away as well. I just ignore them, but anyway. And, they do a peck occasionally, but that's good what good parents do, look after their babies. And I feel so blessed to have the swan family so close to my home. So that's all for now. Please enjoy the new horizons stretching out before you. Reach for the stars. Expect the best. Expect the unexpected. And do become involved in your communities. Till next time, bye for now.